seeing that?
Yes, we can see it.
Oh, thank you so much. So we have quite a bit to do today. We have some wonderful colleagues from USBE joining us this morning to help with presentations. So here's a look at our agenda. You can see that it's quite packed. So I didn't plan a break, but if you get to the point where you need a break, you can feel free to take a break on your own. Becky Peters is going to record the meeting. So you should be getting a message asking you to click that it's okay to record the meeting. So if you have a couple of minutes or have to leave early, or we know you're busy, you'll be able to access the recording later. Some of us were in a meeting yesterday, and one of the presenters shared this quote. And I love quotes. I love reading quotes. I love finding them. I love, finding inspirational poetry and things like that. But this one I really, really love. I wanted to share with you today, and that is, individually, we are just one drop. But together, we are in an ocean, and we're powerful, and we have, amazing things that we can accomplish. So I appreciate you being here today, joining us. I'm thankful for everything that you're doing on a daily basis to support education in your LEAs and in your schools. Here's some reminders. A number of you have sent in your 15% carryover waivers. If you have not done that yet, the deadline was November 1st. We're still accepting those, but you need to get those in quickly. If you don't submit those and get those approved, then you run the risk of having some of your funds reduced. And we did have an LEA last year that lost funds because they didn't submit a waiver and they had excess carryover. And so that's part of the federal Elementary Secondary Education Act statute for Title I. So please get those forms in. If you aren't sure what to do, please reach out to Tammy Long, and she can ensure that you get the form. Let's see, I've got to cancel my alarm here that's going to go off. Okay. The desktop monitoring instrument is due December 1st. Your Title I applications are due December 18th. As of yesterday afternoon, we've had 25 LEAs submit their Title I applications. A number of those have gone back for revision. And some of the things that we're seeing that are requiring us to send things back for revision are schools with low poverty rates, but indicating that they're a school-wide program. Okay, that's not legal. We've had to send some back for that. We've had schools, LEAs, that are not indicating which of their schools are in turnaround, CSI or TSI status. You need to mark those. Those are some of the common things. Sometimes people are leaving part of the application blank or not checking all the assurance boxes appropriately. We sent out detailed directions on several occasions. So if you follow those directions, you should be able to get your applications in and approved without having to do revisions. Here are some upcoming dates for you to keep in mind, and I'm going to go to the next slide. USBE has arranged with Rustein and Manasevit Law Firm. They're a law firm located in Washington, D.C. Their focus is federal education law. So they will be doing a workshop. It's free of charge to you. It is for federal program directors and business administrators, USBE staff that works with federal programs and federal fiscal issues. So you can register at this link, but Becky Peters this morning sent you the PowerPoint, and there was a flyer about this workshop also. So we encourage you to register for that. Those attorneys are really great presenters, and it'll be a good opportunity for you to get some good in-depth fiscal training on federal grants, the Uniform Grant Guidance, and the Code of Federal Regulations, which applies to all of the title education programs, special education, and child nutrition. So we encourage you to participate in that. The National ESEA Conference, which will be virtual this year, registration is still open for that. We're hoping that some of you will also be able to attend that this year. Since there won't be any travel costs, it will significantly reduce the cost of participating in that conference. And it's always excellent. So I'm going to turn some time over for these next few slides to Tammy Long, who is our Fiscal Compliance Manager for Title I and also Title III.
Good morning. For the first slide here, I just want to let you know that the financial folks, we all got together because we had a lot of LEAs complaining that everybody wanted different items. And so we kind of standardized the items that are going to be required on reimbursement requests. And these are for, federal funds, including the CARES Act funds, because these are all federal funds. So we need detailed ledgers when you're submitting for these funds, and a journal entry is not considered to be detailed enough for us. So we need more information, like we need to know who is being paid with these federal funds and the specific purchases that are being purchased with these federal funds. And you can either do a detailed ledger for those items that are being purchased, or you can submit your receipts, whichever works best for the LEA. It's up to you guys what you provide, but we just need to know that if you make an Amazon purchase of $3,000, that it was for appropriate and allowable uses of the funds. And make sure that as an LEA that you keep all the receipts, because all of these funds will be reviewed at some times, whether they're from the state or the feds. So we need to be able to support all of the reimbursements that we've done. And make sure, it's been a little confusing on the CARES funds. People aren't aware that they need to keep time and effort on these funds, but they are federal funds and time and effort documents will be required. So make sure that you get all those gathered up and ready to be scrutinized, because they will be in to look at how we have spent the funds. Next slide. The federal funds, they've had some extensions on the federal fund dates. And just so you're aware, we kind of did a timeline here. So your 2019 will be due September of 2021, September 30th. And then also the federal funds, the 2000 funds will be due in September of 21. And then all of your ESSER funds, they will be due in 2020 of September. And it makes it a lot easier if you request these funds like every quarter so that you're up to date and don't have to do them all at once. And it makes your risk assessment go down too if you do them more often than just one time a year. Next slide. So when you're doing reimbursement requests, Financial Ops downstairs has set some dates that if you don't have your reimbursement request then in by those dates, which are listed over here, that the funds will not be on your allotments that go out the end of the month. And also, if you wait till the last date and there's a problem, we may not get it all approved before the end of the month. So it's better to do it a little early than to wait till the last date to
get them approved, because it's kind of hard when everybody waits till the last. And if there's a problem, then we have to send them back. So please submit those in a timely manner, and just be aware of those dates so that you know when you have to have your reimbursement in. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Tammy. So if you'll be really careful about those dates on that previous slide, making sure you're paying attention to the dates when those funds expire is really critical. So we do not want to send money back to the federal government. Also, you need to be aware that our state auditor's office is going to be doing a single audit at USBE between January and March. Title I will be part of that, but they've also indicated they will be auditing the CARES Act money. So that's why we need to make sure that we have documentation and you're spending your funds on things that are allowable costs. I'm going to turn the time over now to our Assistant Superintendent of Student Learning, Darren Nielsen, and he's going to provide you with some information about some plans and possibilities that will be happening this school year for assessment and accountability. So Darren.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's nice to be with you guys this morning. And I see I have 20 minutes on the agenda, and I'm grateful for each of those minutes. It'll be a challenge to talk about maybe all of the things that some of you might want to talk about. But I'm going to begin by giving an overview of where we are with assessment going into the 2021 school year, and what the board's interest and focus is in regards to that. And then we'll transition into a little overview about accountability, remembering that assessment in many ways is different than accountability, although they get confounded because of the connection that they happen through a school accountability system. So I want to start out by talking about the threats to assessment. This isn't news to you, but these are ones that we've identified and are addressing to the best of our ability as we move through this certainly unusual year. The first threat is equitable access. The question of, do all students have a legitimate opportunity to access learning, and then also to participate in any state assessment that we administer? Utility is the next idea that we talk about in terms of a risk or a threat to assessment. Under the circumstances, I think I saw on the news yesterday a number of around 40 schools right now are in soft closure statewide. And I think that number is pretty close to what they published. And that number, as you guys know, fluctuates. We have schools that come in and out of 14-day full school quarantines. And then we have individual students, obviously, who go through quarantine, and teachers who go through these quarantine processes. And looking forward, we have to consider how that affects the results of the assessment. The next risk or threat is the limited resources. These are legitimate questions of, if we have access to our students in a face-to-face setting that's limited to what we normally have, and we know that instruction is the primary purpose of school, where does assessment fit into that? And is it justifiable to allocate resources, time when we have students in a face-to-face setting used to administer assessments? And then logistics, which this is actually the primary risk, and that is it safe and feasible, practical to administer these assessments to students? This isn't a comprehensive list again, but it's some of the things that we've begun talking about last summer and have involved our technical assistance committee and our advisory committee through the State Board of Education as well. So the answer to those questions, or the question that I get sometimes, is should we continue to administer statewide assessments? We believe that the answer to that is yes, despite the risks that exist. Perhaps more than any year that I've been involved in education, there's a need for us to be able to get increased understanding about the impacts of the events that have occurred on our students' learning. Threw on there just information I received from the Hunt Institute, a survey that they did. Some of you might be surprised that that number is as high as it is. I actually think, in my experience in education, that every parent wants to know how well their students are doing. But in their survey, 89% of parents want to know the academic impacts of COVID-19, which again points to our interest in being able to go forward with administering state assessments to the greatest extent possible. Remembering also that these decisions are based on our current circumstances, and we recognize there are still a lot of unknowns about the future. So our assessment accountability policy advisory, or actually there's some, I'm going to talk before we get to that, mitigation tactics. So how do we mitigate the risks that are present for administering statewide assessments? First one, and this would be what I would call low-hanging fruit, is to extend assessment windows wherever possible. And that's happened with the kindergarten entry test. It's also happened with the Acadians beginning of year assessment. We work with the assessment directors to determine whether we need to extend additional testing windows, and we'll be monitoring that as closely as possible. The second way to try to mitigate some of these risks is to support remote testing conditions whenever feasible. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a coming slide. And then the last one, I think, is just an increased tolerance for reduced student participation. If we go back to the threat, one of the threats to administering statewide assessments, and that one of those being the health and safety and the well-being of our students, we know that there are students across the state who've chosen, under the direction of their parents, to take virtual learning or remote learning as their option for this year, at least to this point, because of concerns about their health and safety of either the students themselves or other family members that reside in their home. It'd be unreasonable to ask somebody who feels concerned about their safety and well-being to then come into a school setting for a test when they're also unwilling to come into a school setting for instruction because of the concerns for their safety. So just an understanding that we probably will have reduced participation. I do want to pause for a moment here, though. We have been able to complete across the state the kindergarten entry assessment. And just to give you an idea of participation rates, we're just beginning the analysis of that data. But we tested 43,725 kindergarten students this year, and that represents 93.2% of the kindergarten students who are enrolled this fall that participated in that KEEP test. In a typical year, that number has ranged around 96%. So last year, for instance, it was 96.9% of the kindergarten students completed the KEEP. In addition to that, Canyon School District recently, one of their board meetings, published some analysis on their Acadians beginning of year assessment, and they indicated a 91% participation for kindergarten. Again, this is on the Acadians beginning of year, a 92% participation on first grade, and 92% for second and third grade as well. So while we need to have an understanding of an increased tolerance for reduced participation, it's also very feasible that the vast majority of our students will be able to participate in the various statewide assessments. So the next two slides are just an overview of our testing timeline to give those of you who might not be as engaged with assessment an idea of how this window works. So we've already completed the PEEP, the KEEP, and the Acadians beginning of year assessments. This Friday is when we're scheduled at the state board level to get the last of our data sets for Acadians. Many of your LEAs have already completed and have your full data set for that and have begun analysis or maybe completed your analysis on the impacts of COVID on literacy, early literacy screener. The Apple, which is our dual language test, is also underway right now. That window is open. The asterisk on there, I just want to point out that the asterisk represents assessments that we've been able to, again, if we go back, think back to the previous slide where we said support remote proctoring wherever feasible. These are assessments that we have been able to support remote proctoring. So how do we define feasible? Well, there are some risks with administering assessments remotely, particularly with our students with disabilities and being able to provide them access and accommodations that they might need to have those assessments delivered to them in an equitable way. But we also have certain tests that have protected item banks. So let's use the ACT, for instance. Obviously, those item banks. The test questions associated with those tests are highly secure and protected. And if one of those test items gets exposed in any state in the country in any form or fashion, that item has to be removed from the bank and is not accessible to any ACT test from that point forward. So we have some tests like that, and remote proctoring has not been able to address and resolve concerns around test security as one of those areas. So you'll see that Utah Aspire Plus, our RISE, the ACT are not currently available for remote proctoring options, but our Acadience, PEEP, and KEEP, we've been able to make some advancements in that way. So let's talk about, if people will say to me, then if we're able to deliver assessments to our students and to the vast majority of our students, why wouldn't we use that data for accountability? Well, when we talk about educational statistics and data associated with that, especially in the context of making determinations or value statements about the effectiveness of individual schools, this becomes very complicated when we consider all the variables that have been changed within our students' learning environments, and also the test administration procedures that will take place. So we're proposing, we believe, as well as many across the country, that assessment data should be decoupled from accountability, which again, there's various rationale for that, but that's the position of the state board. So in their meeting earlier this month, they made two motions. One had to do with the way we calculate student growth or student growth percentiles. Those of you who are involved in assessment have probably recognized that in our accountability manual, the way student growth percentiles is currently calculated and has been since 2014 in the state of Utah is to use an annual calculation for growth. In fact, in order to get a student growth percentile, a student has to have 2 consecutive years of achievement data in a content area test. So third grade, a student takes the English, language arts, and math content area tests. They get an achievement score, but they don't get a growth score because they only have 1 year of data in that content area. The following year, students who continue to be enrolled in the state of Utah and participate in our state assessments, the second year that they receive an achievement score for language arts or math in this example, then they also calculate a student growth percentile, and they get a student growth target associated with that. And that's the information that's used to determine the amount of points in our school accountability system related to growth. So given the fact that this assessment was suspended in 2020, we have a 1 year where no students in the state of Utah have an achievement score. So it would be impossible for us to use single year growth calculation method for any students in the spring of 2021, even if we were able to administer assessments to every student and in a fashion that we felt comfortable, completely comfortable using the data for accountability. We still have a problem with the way growth is calculated. There is an alternative method for doing that, and that's the skip year method. Some states use that as their growth calculation method. We have done analysis through the Center of Assessment to determine what kind of variance that introduces into our system. And so we used the 2017 to 2019 RISE data, SAGE to RISE data, and calculated skip year growth on that and compared it to the single year growth calculations, which we already have in our data set from 2019, to determine if individual students were impacted, either advantaged or disadvantaged, if schools, certain school types were advantaged or disadvantaged by that change, and then also student groups. There was moderate change there, so much to the degree that we anticipated that it would change the outcomes of overall school accountability in 2019 if we were to do that. Given the fact that that was under normal conditions and we introduce a pandemic into that environment, and then if we were to attempt to do that as well, the risk associated with that and the concerns that we would have about the validity of that are high enough that, again, our state board is recognizing that we then take steps to relieve schools from federal and state accountability determinations based on the 2021 assessment data. Then people, in fact, the board, when they looked at that motion, said, what does it mean to relieve schools? That sounds fairly vague. And there was some thought behind the exact language that the Assessment Accountability Policy Advisory Committee used there, because there's still so many unknowns. At this point, we have more clarity because the U.S. Department of Education has released additional information for us about procedures and processes we can use. And then at the state level, obviously, there are a couple of areas that we know directly impact school level accountability using the annual assessment data. So this first statute, 53E 5-11, is the one that requires us, the state board, to award an overall school rating or overall school grade. That would be a statute that we would need to have the state legislature extend that waiver or take some other action that would allow us to not be required to issue overall school grades or ratings. The second one is related to the school turnaround program. And again, we would need relief from the legislature from our requirement to identify the lowest performing schools in the state of Utah and award the money that's associated with that to them as well. Then we have federal accountability. And we are engaged in the process of determining what our next steps are here. There are three ways that we can seek relief from federal accountability. One is an addendum. The U.S. Department of Education has issued what I'll call an expedited addendum process. I don't know that they call it that, but it's laid out in a way that would allow state education agencies to fill out a form-like process for addendums. And there might be areas where we need to seek an addendum. The next option is to take follow the amendment process to our consolidated plan. And that's if we make changes that go more than a single year. I've alluded to you that our growth calculation is impacted for multiple years when we miss a year of assessment, or we have 2 years where we're asked not to use data for, as our board said, to relieve schools from response or school accountability related to the data in 2021. So it's likely that there'll also be an amendment at some future point. The addendum is due by February 1, or the U.S. Department of Education has requested states submit any addendums related to this year by February 1st. And then finally, there is the amendment and the waiver. Those are standard processes that are available in any year for states with their consolidated plans. And the final option then is a waiver. The State Department of Education has made it clear that unlike in the spring of 2020, where they awarded waivers to accountability and assessment across the board to any state that applied for it, they were all granted those waivers. They do not expect to award waivers for delivery of state assessments in the 2021 school year. However, they were not in as strong a position related to accountability. So it's possible, maybe even likely, that in the coming weeks, we will, through the State Board of Education, need to seek a waiver for certain provisions in school accountability as well. So those are the steps that lay before us, the path that we're on. Again, to summarize, we're moving forward and hopeful that we can collect as much state assessment data as possible. And then we also are taking actions. I'll be discussing with the Education Interim Committee this afternoon some of these slides that we've talked about this morning, with the intent of seeking state flexibility from school accountability. And so information about that, while it won't be final until the legislative session is completed, we'll provide updates throughout that process. The final thing that I wanted just to give you an overview on, many of you may not be aware of this. I think everyone had a chance to respond to our survey back in September related to our development of an assessment strategic plan. This slide just depicts the steps and phases we went through. That plan is scheduled to go before the board in December at their board meeting. And that plan is designed to do a couple of things. One is to inform assessment practices in the state of Utah for the next 5 to 10 years. It took a look at next generation assessments and what should the State Board of Education consider. It has a strong emphasis on creating a balanced assessment system. It took into consideration portrait of a graduate and personalized learning initiatives that are gaining momentum in the state of Utah. And then finally, that plan will also inform the writing of our next grade 3 through 8 RFP, which is scheduled to be released in January of this year. So that's an overview, and I'm open, obviously, for any questions that you might have.
Do any of you have questions, or you can put those in the chat box, and Tracy Van Deventer is monitoring the chat box for us.
No questions yet.
Okay, and I'll stay on the meeting for a short time and be able to respond to the chat box as well if you have questions that you'd like to put in there. But thank you very much, Rebecca, for giving me time on your agenda. And thank you to our Title I directors for the great work that you're doing across the state of Utah.
Thank you so much, Darren. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. So we appreciate your time. We know you're busy. So next, we're going to move to Sarah Young. Sarah's going to share some, oh, I can't get the slide to go. Just a second. There we go. Whoops. Sarah's going to provide you with some additional information and updates related to the CARES Act reporting that she talked about in the September meeting.
Awesome. Thank you, Becky. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Can I share my screen? Would that be possible? While we are working on that, let me just kind of give you a why I'm here moment. And so really when it comes to our ESSER gear reporting, I had been with you in September and kind of provided you an overview of what our plan was and our timeline was related to the reporting requirements that we had seen from the U.S. Department of Education, noting that they were in draft format. So as a part of that, they closed public comment and they actually responded to public comment, which was great because we had asked for some clarification in spaces. The unfortunate moment was that they then decided to do another round of public comment, which was released to the field on November 1st of this year. So as a part of that, we have a new updated tool that they are receiving feedback on. But that put the State Board of Education in an interesting spot where we were, kind of debating the pros and cons of moving forward with asking for reporting, as well as then recognizing they could change some of those requirements, later in December, and that we could have to come back, and kind of trying to figure out how to best, thread the needle in terms of asking for information once, with confidence, and yet not leaving you, a window of only like a week with which to report, because the final report is due to the federal government on February 1st, and they have not changed that date. So it looks like I still can't share. I am wondering. Oh, I think there's talking that I can't hear.
I think if they make you a co-host, you can share.
Is that possible, Becky? Or should I just kind of give the verbal update and then provide the resource? Oh, I'm a co-host. Hooray.
Made you a co-host, so go ahead.
Thank you so much. Perfect. Awesome. All right, friends. So here we go. So this is version 2 of where we are. So I'm just going to provide an update of the changes from the first tool to now the newly released tool. And we're really pretty hopeful that this is going to be what the final version is. The updates are pretty minor, but still worth going over. So again, just a reminder, they have now released a second round of public comment. I will share this slide deck so that if you have any questions or want to see the resources, clicking on these links, you're welcome to do that. We will note that public comment closes on December 2nd, which informs then when the reporting from LEAs is going to occur here momentarily. So as an update, I'm highlighting things in yellow that are different than we told you the first time in September. So we plan to release the reporting tool for for LEAs on December 4th, 2020. So here's the plan. Basically, public comment is going to close. Those comments are going to be posted. That gives me and the rest of USBE staff the opportunity to look at those comments and see if there's any substantive that they could change or add or modify. And then we'll use that to inform the release of the tool to the LEAs so that we are as close to the final version as we expect to be. In releasing it on December 4th, we are asking that LEAs respond to that tool no later than January 8th of 2021. So that will give you kind of the reporting window that we're looking for from LEAs. As far as the individual elements to be reported, super pleased to announce they have taken away the methodologies for calculating equitable share. So it's just, from the changes in the Department of Ed rule to that being declared, non-allowable. And so they've removed that element of reporting. The other two elements that we had previously presented still stand. So that includes reporting on expenditures for equitable services in terms of the total amount of funds the LEAs have spent of their award within the reporting window on public schools versus those that have gone to equitable services for private schools, both for ESSER as well as for GEAR. New to the reporting requirements is luckily a yes or no. I love when they add yeses or nos because hopefully that makes it just a lot more straightforward and less detail oriented. So these are the financial use cases that they are asking each LEA to report on for their SEA base awards. So if you received a base award in regards to not having met that $21,000 threshold, your ESSER 90% award, and then your GEAR award independently. For each of those, they are asking our LEAs to reflect if they have purchased educational technology with that award, yes or no. Activities focus specifically on addressing unique needs of low-income students. So for everyone who received GEAR, that's a yes. In regards to your ESSER and your base awards, you would have to declare that locally. Providing mental health services and supports, yes or no. Sanitization and minimization of spread of infectious diseases, including cleaning supplies, PPE, training for staff, yes or no. Summer learning and supplemental after-school programs, yes or no. And then they have an other category. So that's a yes or no with a descriptor if you choose yes in terms of reporting on that element. Full-time equivalent positions has been revised, which is great because we had a lot of questions about what that was going to look like in more detail. And so the department has clarified that they are seeking the total count of full-time equivalent positions at each LEA for the following dates. So there are 4 dates that they are looking for LEAs to report on. The first being September 30th, 2018. The second being September 30th, 2019. They're asking for you to draw a line on that March 13th, 2020, date of the federal national emergency, and then September 30th, 2020, which is the end of the federal reporting period. This will actually go into our reports for both ESSER as well as GEAR, but we're just asking LEAs to report it once because we can use the data set to report in both spaces. I've included a table just so you can kind of get a visual of what the department is asking for in terms of just looking for those numbers, but it follows the narrative above. As far as the remote learning and CARES funding, all of this section stayed the same, except for they added one additional criteria that they're asking for LEAs to reflect yes or no on. And that is if the LEA implemented a method around participation in individual coaching or check-ins. So that is a yes or no question, just one additional item that they're looking for clarification on. Again, here's the draft slide. You'll see that they have added that particular item in regards to both elementary as well as secondary and asking LEAs to yes, no, reflect in that space. As far as student internet access and CARES funding, all of this was maintained. So they are still asking for yes or no's related to LEAs using CARES funding for student internet access, and then asking for yes or no's specific to the strategies for internet access that the LEA provided to the field. And again, I've included the slide or the draft table on the next slide, just again, so you can have a visual to follow with the narrative. Student devices for LEAs, this did not change either. So they're asking for a yes or no if the LEA provided dedicated learning devices for students in elementary and secondary, and then the number of students with a dedicated device from the LEA in elementary and secondary. So we will go ahead and fill in your information related to the December 30th student enrollment count. We'll use your October 1st counts related to that. But we are asking you to report how many students have a dedicated device in elementary and secondary related to your LEA. For the GEAR funding report, we actually didn't see any changes there. They were all captured above in the items that will be reported for ESSER as well. So I've updated this slide to kind of show you the breakdown with the additional elements such as the financial use cases, the number of FTEs for the following dates, and then making sure that it's co-reported in both ESSER and GEAR. As far as the state of Utah reporting, this is all the exact same as what we showed you in September. So this will just look at asking about PPE procurement in K-12, yeses or nos related to, did you procure these items using CARES funding? Training for teachers, did the LEA use funding for training for teachers in relation to COVID-19? And if yes, asking the LEA to report the total amount of CARES funding that was used to train teachers, again, within the reporting period, so through September 30th, 2020. Infrastructure, remote and blended learning. Again, this is the same as what we presented in September, just asking for yes or no's related to the procurement of specific solutions for remote and blended. Finally, the same as before, optional narrative for the state. This is where you have an opportunity to provide additional information. With the reporting window being what it is, part of that is also to be able to provide this information to our legislators in terms of informing their next steps that they're going to be taking in January, February, and the first week of March in terms of next steps for the education budget. So this is really your opportunity to let them know what the continuing needs are, and if you have any feedback within that space. It is optional, you don't have to include it. As far as logistics goes, just one last update. So the data will be collected through a Qualtrics tool. So we will send an email asking for the reporting. It will go to Title I directors, BAs, and the award points of contact on ESSER, GEAR, and ESSER 90%. So I'm highlighting this because if you are one of the individuals clearly as Title I directors within those spaces, you also may want to coordinate with your BA as well as your award points of contact to figure out who's going to be responsible for this, and just make sure that it's not duplicated, because we certainly don't want LEAs to be having more than one person trying to do this, but we also want to make sure that we're really clear that everybody has an opportunity to work together in this space. The full tool will be available on the first page of the survey. We often get that piece of feedback where it's like, I need to see everything up front. So we'll make sure that that's available, quick and easy download. It'll be included in the email as well, so that you can prepare your answers and then just enter them one time. So just a friendly reminder, our plan is to release the tool to LEAs on December 4th, 2020. And we're asking LEAs to have that information back to us by January 8th, 2021. And we'll be doing individual follow-up with LEAs as necessary from that space. So I really appreciate the opportunity to give an update. Becky, thank you so much. I certainly recognize that this is, as they've kind of created this CARES opportunity and these awards in a very quick time fashion, that the reporting requirements have come after that, and that it's definitely, a bit of a moving target. So we appreciate you, and your leadership in working with us. Hopefully these are all very minor tweaks and changes. And if you have any questions, you are welcome to reach out to me. So with that, I will stop screen sharing and I will turn it back over to Becky.
Thank you so much, Sarah. We had a couple questions in the chat box. First of all, we can send your slides out, right?
Yep, and I'm going to drop a copy into or a link into the chat box right now.
Oh, great. And then the other question, one of our directors wants to know if they're only reporting on this point in time, or what they plan to, how they plan to expend funds throughout the year.
It's a great question. So we will be very clear that what we are asking for you to report on is going to be the time from the March 30th, kind of earliest date, or not March 30th, March 13th, earliest date of award through September 30th of 2020. So that is the reporting period. So we're not asking about what your intents are moving forward. There will be 3 reports associated with the CARES funding. So anything beyond September 30th of this year, you will be reporting in your report this time next year.
There was actually another question, if we could just confirm, this applies to CARES funding that's federal, not county.
That is correct. So in all of these cases, we will be very clear what we were asking for the numbers to align to. So for example, the use cases, the financial use cases, we'll actually ask you to break that down by what are the financial use cases for ESSER, what are or 90%, what are the financial use cases for the ESSER 10% base, if you received part of that, and then what are the financial use cases related to gear. So those are the 3 awards that we are speaking about in regards to the use of this CARES money.
Thank you so much. And just to make sure everyone sees in the chat that there is a link now that Sarah has put for us to be able to access her slides and have those available for use. Thank you, Sarah.
Awesome.
Yeah,
thank you.
Sarah, and thank you, Tracy, for monitoring the chat box. So I'm going to pull our PowerPoint back up now. So next we're going to hear from Kathleen Britton. Kathleen is the Director of Child Nutrition Programs at USBE, and Michelle Martin is a coordinator in the Child Nutrition Programs area. So I'm going to turn it over to them. I know you have questions about, what's going to happen next year with your free reduced lunch rates and that kind of thing. So Kathleen and Michelle.
Well, thank you, Becky. Just want to thank everybody for including us and welcoming us to join your training. There's been many questions on October free and reduced numbers due to the fact with COVID-19, USDA allowed all students to eat free. With that, parents did not have to fill out a free and reduced at lunch application. So we just received further guidance that these reports that we usually submit to USDA have been put on hold because we cannot receive the data correctly. Our schools have been trying to do the October surveys, but as you can expect, most of the data was skewed due to the fact that parents did not have to fill out the applications. What USDA is telling us, the Department of Ed has to make a decision on what year they want to use the data. So we're waiting to hear what for you guys of what the Department of Ed wants to use. If they want to use next year, they'll use the 2019, but then going forward, what do you use? That's still all in the process right now of what the Department of Ed can decide on and what USDA is collecting. I know our schools have been trying really diligently to collect this information. But if a parent doesn't have to fill out an application to receive a free meal, that's why we're struggling to get this information. Schools do have to have submitted us the information. We're still missing quite a few districts that have not, and we'll comb through that. But we've already seen kind of a discrepancy in that data. So it's not really good data to pull for your Title I funds. We'll be able to publish something in January if USDA requires it of us. Does anybody have any questions on that part? Because I know that was the biggest concern for everybody. The next I have is the SMART. I guess there was some questions. Becky had said to me that you guys were about the Start Smart Utah breakfast that was supposed to be starting this school year through the legislative change. That is we are now currently looking to submit a statewide waiver to the board to see if we can push that off for another year for the burden that it's caused. I can have Michelle step in a minute here and kind of talk a little bit about the Start Smart. Michelle, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So we had heard that there were a handful of you that may not know what Start Smart Utah is. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background. Last year, House Bill 222 passed and it was enacted this year. And Start Smart Utah is an expansion of the school breakfast program statewide. So there are there's a 3-year implementation period, and had COVID not been something we experienced this year, schools who participate in the National School Lunch Program that do not currently participate in the school breakfast program would have to start implementing that program as of May 2021. And then if individual schools had a percentage of 70% free and reduced students or greater based on their most recent October survey, they would have had to start implementing an alternative breakfast style. An alternative breakfast style is defined as breakfast after the bell per the Start Smart Utah program. And that would have had to been implemented as of May 2021. And then following that in 2021, 2022, 50%, if your site had a free and reduced percentage of 50% or greater, you would have had to start the breakfast after the bell. And then the following school year, if your school site had a free and reduced percentage of 30% or greater, you would have had to start an alternative breakfast model. There are waiver opportunities if your school site is experiencing a logistical or hardship implementation issue with starting Start Smart Utah. But like Kathleen said, because of the current circumstances and the feedback we've received from the food service directors who are operating your school nutrition programs, we are doing our best to make sure that we have a statewide waiver available to postpone that implementation. If you would like to move forward and it is feasible and reasonable for your sites to do that, you can start those requirements now. But like Kathleen said, that flexibility will be available this year. And then if we still are issues due to COVID, primarily one of the biggest concerns is actually staffing, because school sites are quarantined and then shut down. The food service staff are also part of that population, so they may not be able to prepare meals. So they're experiencing staffing issues is really the biggest thing we're hearing about as far as being able to successfully implement this right now from their perspective. But I will make sure to pop in the chat. We have a Spark page that has breakfast information about this too that you can read in addition. And then I'll also share with you, we have a child nutrition canvas page where you can access some additional resources that give you information about Start Smart Utah. So I'll make sure to pop those in the chat. But do you have any other questions that I can answer right now?
No other questions are in the chat.
Okay. If you do have questions, please feel free to reach out to either of us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen and Michelle, for taking time this morning to join us. If we receive any questions that come in to us, any of us will make sure that we get those to you. But if you think of questions, Title I directors, if you pop those in the chat, we'll make sure that we get Kathleen and Michelle. So thank you so much. We're going to move on now to Dr. Christelle Estrada. She created a new award just recently that was presented at our last State Board of Education meeting, the first week of November. I'm going to turn the time over to Christelle to tell you about these schools and the criteria and how other schools may strive to achieve these awards as well. So, Dr. Estrada.
So that was applause. Thanks, Becky and Tracy for checking on the chat, and thanks to each of you for attending. So we're going to look at this, and one of the reasons we actually developed this approach was based on an underlying assumption. The underlying assumption is we actually don't have to go out of the state of Utah to find really wonderful, promising practices and excellent teaching. When we did Title III visits, there were huge commendations for a range of teachers throughout the state. And the underlying assumption with all of that is when we're learning together, then whatever promising practice actually aligns resources to evaluate program effectiveness and make sure that the focus is really on increased learning outcomes, then how do we recognize that? How do we learn from each other? So I'm going to talk to you about the criteria as well as letting you know that on December 2nd, we're actually going to have our first open conversation on Zoom with one of the school districts and all their principals. So what was the success criteria? We'll go to the next slide. The success criteria was actually determined with Tracy and Becky. And one of the reasons we picked an enrollment criteria of 400 plus is that oftentimes schools with a higher population have to think really strategically in relationship to braiding funding, which includes not only Title I and Title III, but state funding as well. The second criteria was 80 to 100% economically disadvantaged. So these were all Title I schools. One of the reasons we picked the percentage of 40% students learning English and 40 to 60% of students who actually reached their annual growth goal was to focus on growth. And one of the reasons we did this was about 4 years ago, we took all the Eccles Business School 4-year scholarship students, and we did we looked at their course taking patterns. And we actually discovered that when students become English proficient or 5.0 on WIDA before they leave elementary school, they have equitable access to more rigorous coursework, right? So make sure that you're really clear about the way in which the criteria was developed. I guess the next slide. So these are the 5 LEAs and the 11 schools of excellence. Now, we actually did 2 categories. The first category was the criteria that we first showed you. And if you look at this, this is pretty impressive in relationship to the range of schools who actually are very clear about individual growth goals and what it is they need to do to ensure that teachers, this goes back to what Darren says, that they actually have access to their annual growth goal. And that annual growth goal is determined by when the students, so it's very personalized and differentiated. It's when they entered our school system and at what level of English proficiency. So the point is, if you're a high school student, you're a refugee student, and you come in at the 9th grade and you're a level 1, then your annual growth goal is personalized according to you. It's not the standardized form. So we have Canyon School District, Granite School District, Ogden School District, Salt Lake School District, and Washington. I actually spent some time with the Title I principals in Granite School District and to do the presentations. And we had this really great experience where, all the principals and the people at that meeting were applauding and grateful and really willing and wanting to learn with and from each other. So let's look at the next slide. I hope the transition doesn't make you nauseous. It's called vortex, and so I always find it really interesting. So why these criteria? So I want to focus on the research just a minute. The highest effect size in Hattie's research is collective teacher efficacy. So the way in which teachers work together, whether it's by grade level or however it's organized, really shows that the impact of teacher collaboration is critical. The other one is teachers' personal estimates of achievement for students without focusing on what some people consider as deficits. You know, about 5 years ago, there was this amazing study that showed 90% poverty or economically disadvantaged, 90% English learners, and 90% achievement. So the question ends up being, how is it that teachers actually perceive the students that come into their classroom? And, you know, kids are really incredibly insightful and can read people. So the way in which they perceive that other people are perceiving them does have an impact on them. And then the last thing that Hattie says is cognitive task analysis, which means, you know, what are those ways in which the way in which the curriculum and teaching is designed is challenging and engaging for students. So one question to really ask ourselves is, you know, as individuals, as people in the state agency, as people at the district level, as principals, everybody in leadership and every educator. So what are we actually doing? I'm not talking about thinking about, I'm talking about doing to mitigate discriminatory practices and policies that limit equitable access to close Utah's opportunity gap. Now, the reason we're using opportunity gap is that the question ends up being who has access to which courses and why, not looking at the student and saying, well, you know, based on your achievement, we don't think you're going to be successful in this 9th grade AP class, right? So that's the piece that's really important. Okay, so then we added a special criteria. So the next slide, please. So this is pretty important. And the reason, again, it's really important is that elementary school students that actually reach WIDA composite of 5, we use that criteria of 10% or more of the students in schools of excellence. We added this additional criteria. And the state average for becoming proficient for students learning English is only 6%. So we thought that 10% was an incredible challenge because it's, you know, way above what the state average is. So if you look at the schools, the top school is Backman in Salt Lake School District with 13%, Edison in Salt Lake, Monroe and Granite, Odyssey in Ogden, Spring Creek in Provo, Escalante in Salt Lake, Liberty in Salt Lake, and Mountain View in Salt Lake. So again, remember, we're going to have this really interesting conversation with the principals of all the schools in Salt Lake. And we'll do, the invitation is out for other districts with principals and teachers, as well as district people and even students. So we'll have this conversation, it'll be recorded, and I'll send out a notice of December 2nd and when that will happen. I think it's 10 o'clock. Okay, the next slide. So I'm open to questions and comments, and the next steps, as I mentioned before, will be school panels. So we can actually hear from educators. We're looking at other data sets. One is to actually close the opportunity gap in high schools. And we already have kind of a list of those top high schools, which I think you'll really be surprised, frankly. But they're actually closing the opportunity gap, which means that students are becoming better prepared who are English learners for post-secondary success. So any questions or comments? I'm open to anything.
One question from Nathan Marshall. Is the percent of ELL students who reach proficiency ones that started at a 1? Or does it look at all students' scores 2 through 4 and reach a 5?
Yeah, it's all students learning English, right? Because remember, the whole point is whenever you come into our school system, the annual growth goal is determined based on your proficiency when you actually come in. You see the point. The point is really important because why would we have a standard criteria for an annual growth goal when you have an 8th grader who comes in and they're a refugee student, right? So that's really the point. That's why this whole idea about personalized instruction and the way in which we differentiate and how we use the individual student reports, which Granite does very well. I was at their Title I meeting and they were really spectacular in relationship to helping use this individual student reports, which actually came out much earlier this year than ever before, like the first part of September. Any other questions?
And I might just add, Christelle, that growth goal is in the accountability manual. So if people are not sure, we can get that to you.
Hey, Christelle, this is Annalise. How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you, Annalise? It's good to hear you.
Quick question. Would you mind sharing the list of the top high schools you're mentioning so we could learn from them?
Yes, we're working out the details.
Okay.
So that probably won't happen until I'm actually thinking it'll probably be like right after the December 2nd panel. And then we'll actually release the recognitions. The other thing we're doing, which we found out, which I'm sure you're all going to be really interested in, is the transition between grade 3 and grade 4 is critical in relationship to whether the students actually become proficient by the end of 6th grade. And then we're looking at the transition, really effective transitions between elementary and middle. Oftentimes, well, I would just say the pattern is, you know, when students leave elementary and their whole world is kind of transformed, they don't really make that transition very effectively unless the LEAs and the schools really work together for vertical alignment. The same thing with middle to high schools. So we're going to be doing that so we can all learn from each other. So thanks, Annalise, for your question.
Perfect.
Hey, Christelle, just curious, there were a lot of Salt Lake City school districts. Do they happen to be in the same maybe feeder cone?
You know, actually they don't, which is really interesting because initially when we started doing monitoring and looking at classrooms, and so this is what I learned, because every day I wake up and I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to learn so much today. And I do, and it's always unexpected. We actually thought we would do monitoring of classrooms based on feeder patterns. It didn't work out that way at all. What we actually found out later was the TSI schools designated for English learners were like all over the place. And so then we had to really rethink about what we would actually do to provide support for schools in TSI, targeted school improvement, for students learning English. So your question is like really critical. We're hoping we can actually figure out what that looks like. In Salt Lake, one of the strategies we're thinking about is identifying all those students who became proficient in those schools, and then identify which schools they're going to, which middle schools they're going to, because they're not going all to the same middle schools. And then trying to figure out how we mentor them to make sure that if they're English proficient, they actually have access based on counselors' programming for more academic courses. So I don't know if that helps your question, you're wondering, but I always thought the same thing too, but it doesn't work out that way. So thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Christelle?
So I just want to say how much I love working with Title I directors, Title III directors, and visiting classrooms, which I haven't been able to do obviously since the pandemic. But the work that you're doing is really incredible. And so this whole idea of recognizing that work is such a boost to everybody. So, and learning, from and with each other. So thank you for your dedication and your commitment to our children. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Christelle. Our next segment of the meeting, we're going to spend a few minutes talking to you about state reporting requirements. We're going to break into some small groups, and then we'll come back to the whole group to gather your feedback. And then also just some ideas of some possible professional learning opportunities that we might engage in or not, again, depending on the feedback we get from you. And then following that, Cheryl Ellsworth, our family and community engagement specialist, is going to present some information to you about a family engagement initiative that she's been working really hard on for the past several months to get all the paperwork and everything at our office in place so that she can move forward with that. So first of all, we want to talk to you about LEA reporting requirements for state programs. We have had feedback from the state legislature saying that they're receiving comments from LEAs saying reporting requirements are burdensome. There are too many of them. Some of our State Board of Education members have reported the same thing, that they're hearing from LEAs saying there are too many reporting requirements. Now, in 2019, the Office of the Legislative Auditor General spent quite a bit of time at USBE, several months, actually working out of our office, interviewing staff, reviewing all of the kinds of reports and information that is being asked of LEAs. And then they prepared this report, which is linked right here. So this is a performance audit of public education reporting requirements. So if you're interested in reading that whole report, you can do that. And in there, the OLAG, the Office of the Legislative Auditor General, made some recommendations back to USBE to review all of the state reporting requirements and then work in conjunction with the legislature and the State Board of Education to make changes to state statute or board rule, or both, depending on what the report was, to try to reduce and consolidate some of these reports to reduce the burden on LEAs. So Darren Nielsen has been tasked with leading up this initiative for the state board. And initially there were 96 reports that they identified through state code and board rule that were required. So they identified 5 and presented that to the Education Interim Committee in October and said, some of these are programs that are still on the state books, but they're no longer being funded. So we need to eliminate that. Or here's a program that had a lot of requirements in year 1, but now the program's been going for a number of years. LEAs are already, doing this work and have been for a while. We could reduce some of the requirements maybe related to those programs. Excuse me. So they identified 5 out of 96. And the legislature said, no, there has to be more than 5. There's, you still saying there's 91. What can we do about some of those? So what we want to do is gather feedback from you that we can then use to get back to USBE leadership. And then Darren can take that back to the state board and to the legislature to talk about what things can be done to reduce some of that burden. Before we break into those groups, I want to tell you about a couple of efforts that are taking place right now at USBE that are designed specifically to help reduce burden on LEAs. And one of those is, as you're aware, many federal programs and a lot of state programs, for example, digital teaching and learning, some of the others, maybe K-3 literacy and others, require that LEAs in schools, sometimes these are at the school level, there's a comprehensive needs assessment that's conducted. And so then that work sometimes becomes duplicative, right? Because you've already had to do a needs assessment for a federal program, and then you may be asked to do another one for digital teaching and learning, or, IDEA or some other state or federal program. So we are working with the Region 15 Comprehensive Center at WestEd, and we have been meeting for a number of months. And we do have LEA stakeholders involved, and some of you in this meeting today are involved representing your LEAs. So we're in the development stage right now. We have these 5 LEAs that have agreed to pilot this when it's completed, and then provide us with feedback. So all along the way, we've had these LEA leaders who've been saying, we really want this to be part of it. That part right there, we don't think is that important. So let's not worry about that piece of it. So the further goal of this is, once we have this comprehensive needs assessment developed that will cover all of the federal programs and all of the state programs, we'll be the first state in the country to have a comprehensive needs assessment that does that. Georgia has a nice one, but it primarily covers their federal programs. Arizona has one that's good, and it just covers the needs assessment in their schools. But this would be comprehensive, would take in all the programs. So eventually, once that's developed, the next goal, and again, working with our state board and our legislature, would be to develop a consolidated plan. So rather than filling out a Title I plan, a land trust plan, K-3 literacy plan, there's so many plans out there, is then to develop a tool, a similar tool where we could consolidate the plans. So those are 2 things that we're currently involved in right now. The CNA is under development. When that's done and LEAs have piloted that, and we have feedback about how it needs to be refined, revised before it rolls out to everyone, then the next goal will be to develop that consolidated plan. And there are some other states. We heard from the state of Wisconsin yesterday in a meeting. They're working on this. The state of Michigan is working on this. So this is taking place across the country as state education agencies realize that there's a lot of work for LEAs to do. And we have small LEAs, charter LEAs that are single campuses and some small rural LEAs that have, you know, limited number of personnel to do all of this work. So it does become burdensome. So we're working on that. The other thing, under the Every Student Succeeds Act, there's a requirement for a resource allocation review. So we again are working with the Region 15 Comprehensive Center at Wested to develop a process. And we have 2 LEAs right now that have agreed, that have indicated they will pilot this for us. We have a charter LEA and a district LEA. We'd like to have at least 1 additional district LEA to participate in that. So if that's something that you would be willing to do, you could pop that in the chat box. You can send me an email so that we can loop you in as we continue to develop this more. We want to involve some LEAs in that actual process. So it's something that you feel is valuable. It's not a punishment. It's not meant to be a punishment. It's not meant to be an evaluation. It's a way of looking at how LEAs are allocating fiscal and human resources and other resources to support schools based on the needs those individual schools have. So not looking at equitable, or not looking at equal distribution of resources, but looking at it on a basis of equity. So if we have a really, you know, school that has a lot of needs and achievement is not doing well, maybe that school needs additional human fiscal resources to come in and help support that continuous school improvement process. So what we're going to do is, and again, we cannot rescind reporting requirements for federal programs. So if you say, you know, we really hate the desktop monitoring instrument, or we really don't like filling out all of the paperwork in Utah grants for the Title I program, those are not things we can waive. You have to fill those out. That's a federal requirement. So what we're talking about are state funded program reporting requirements. So the questions are, what reports from these state level programs does your LEA find burdensome? What suggestions do you have to help mitigate those reporting burdens on LEAs? And we want to review those recommendations. We'll give those back to Darren Nilsson so that he can go to the next time he goes up to meet with the legislature for this agenda item at the legislature. You know, there will be additional reports that can be considered for either being, you know, changed so the burden's not so great, or possibly even removed if there's not a need for it. So we're going to break into some small groups for about 15 minutes so that you have an opportunity to talk in smaller groups with your peers. Then we'll come back from those small groups and have some time for you to share out with the full group. And people from the USBE team, if they get randomly assigned into one of those breakout groups, they'll be taking notes and giving information back. But this is really important to us. So if we don't know what it is you find burdensome, and it's just general, you know, we just don't like it, there's just too much, there's no way for us to know what we need to do to help support you and help reduce those burdens. So I'm going to assign us into some breakout groups, and that will take just a minute. So you'll just be randomly assigned.
And while you're doing that, Becky, I just want to thank Lisa and Aaron for volunteering to come and be help as we move forward, and lots of people giving kudos to the work and realize how important it is to release that burden. And so we appreciate all that the state's doing to try to reduce that expectation on LEAs.
Thank you, Tracy. So you should be receiving that invitation if you'll just click and join that room. And then I will bring you back in about 15 minutes. So I'm going to set an alarm on my phone so that I remember to bring you back. I heard some really amazing discussions as I tried to pop in and out of some of the rooms. So this time right now, we'd like each group to kind of report back to the full group. And we have plenty of time to do this. So I heard some really great comments. I heard several people commenting about they felt the consolidated needs assessment would be useful to them. We're really happy to hear that. But I'd like to hear what different groups have to say, and then please put things in the chat box as well that we can capture and make sure we get this information back to Darren Nielsen and others so that we can actually start tackling some of your concerns.
This is Tracy. I'm going to share first and then I can watch the chat. But our group spoke about that there's just so many of them and that they just keep coming. So there doesn't seem to be a break. And you think you maybe have done one because there's so many of the same types of things that are asked that, you know, it feels like you've already finished that one. So recognizing that there is a lot of reports and many of them we might not be able to address because they are at the federal level, but especially those in our group who were feeling the most pain was our charter school LEAs, where they have not only all of the funding reporting that's required for receiving funding, but then they have another layer of charter reporting that's above and beyond that. And recognizing it just is a really heavy load. And we actually went through and listed some of the state reporting that we could think of. And then we had one of our charter school directors share that if we could maybe even organize it by the kinds of funds that come, or maybe by themes. So if we had a location to go, we could fill it out and it would all be all the different reports related to one, like all related to after school programs, or maybe one that's all related to curriculum, or and then the underlying agreement was if we could have one place to go to get access to all the reports. So just trying to track, where do I go to get into it? Or how do I find where that's at? Or I don't remember exactly what that link is. That would be a big relief for some who are trying to keep track, and they're the only person that's able to do it. So. And then it looks like Leslie has shared from her group, it's difficult to be efficient when the Qualtrics forms won't save along the way. So if we could make those changes, the folks then need to start all over, and a master list with links and directions would be helpful. That came from our group as well. That would make a big difference on how we are able to even organize. Some people have been just keeping folders and folders and folders with each of them and trying to date them so that they can try to go and find them. And that's just a lot of extra work maybe we don't have to have. Other comments that could come in the chat, or if anybody's willing to jump in, turn off your mute and share that way.
Hey, Becky, I know you popped into our group, but I was kind of taking some notes there. A couple of things that came up was having a master place kind of to keep the data, whether if that's going to be data gateway, that is the crosswalk for all things data, but then because this year gifted, talented, AP and concurrent, that we were able to get that data, but it didn't match like wherever the state was pulling that data from and loading it was not matching local LEAs. So that if we're going to do that it needs to be accurate data, and we didn't have a dashboard to be able to cross-reference that. There also was a concern about Qualtrics, that it's all dependent on the USBE specialist, and if the specialist changes, how we're collecting data, reporting that data is different. And if the specialist knows Qualtrics, the hairier the application is and the requirements are. So if you have a USBE specialist, content area specialist that loves Qualtrics, it becomes a little more cumbersome and tedious. And that there also seems to be a disconnect between Utah, like filling out the form from the content area specialist and filling out the form in Utah grants, and then like hitting submit and everything gets approved to finance. And our finance guys in our LEA are a whole different beast, and those two are not talking and meshing. So like we submit that grant, and then finance takes over, and then never the two shall meet, and there's not that connection there. And it just sounds like there's a general consensus that back in the day, UCA had all of the different grants and there was one due date and one needs assessment. Whereas now we just, every week we finish one grant and then another grant is due and we have to pull that all of this data again. And that seems to be a little overwhelming and cumbersome.
Okay, yeah, that's something we've noticed too with Utah grants is we have the needs assessment that was in there. We have, abilities for LEAs to look at all their funding streams and figure out how they were going to braid and blend those funds, which in Utah grants, everything is in a silo right now. So.
And within the chat, we have a couple of ideas here too. A small district, there's usually only one person who's doing that. Whereas if you're in a bigger district, often that's distributed across a number of people. State years funding, recognizing that's improved and the data selection for that actually is pretty critical. Looking at in group 1, there was a need for many reminders for due dates. So if we did have one due date, that would help. Also just sort of a survey fatigue on people's part. Is it possible to load also title funds in spring, summer? We realize that's a federal program, but do we appreciate the simplified Title I plan, looking forward to consolidated needs assessment and maybe a common due date? Group 7, talking about consideration for charter schools with regards to reporting requests being in line with their school's charter requirement. Group 6 saying the reports often come at once. Having extensions this year for various reports has been nice to spread the work, and the due dates come usually at busier times of our school year. And being able to have more than one owner for each grant could also be helpful. Group 4 is excited at the idea of streamlining the applications. And then group 6 as a whole, nice to see Becky's email saying what changed in DMI, for instance. Having these notices in the grant platform, if we have one platform, would be nice. Also, if the prompts are the same as our last year's response was accepted, maybe having the LEA's response sort of pre-populated on something that's already been approved, unless, there's a major change. So it'd be the same, or they can just make small tweaks.
Mm-hmm.
And those
Yeah,
are
with
from
your
the chat.
Title I plans, you filled those out last year for the first time on that new form. So this year, there's no need to create a whole new one. If you want to tweak it, that's fine, but you could simply, attach the one from last year if you're still working on the same things. We just made sure that plan encapsulated all of the federal requirements and the assurances that were necessary. So, yeah, we're more than willing to do that. The other thing about Utah grants that we had an ability in the Utah consolidated application to pre-populate more things. Where in Utah grants, it doesn't operate that well, which has been frustrating on our end. I know it's been frustrating on your end, but the only thing they can do is have forms that you have to download, fill out, upload. And it seems like, this year we had a lot of delays with Utah grants where they had to keep going back to the vendor and having them, make corrections. So, yeah, we're aware of it. We're hoping over time they can do some things to streamline that. We know that's an issue. So what other things, what other concerns, things that you want to point out? This is really beneficial to us to have your feedback.
Becky, this is Missy. I just really appreciated having the perspective from the charter. And then I was able to chat with Sherry, who's a huge school district. And so seeing those different perspectives from a medium district, it really helped shore that conversation up as part of that consolidated needs assessment. So I think that'll be helpful when we go back to that bigger group or smaller group, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Missy. That's great. Okay, I hope that we've captured all of your things. I know that we're capturing things in the chat box and the USBE staff that were spread around in some of those groups. I know we're taking notes, and I tried to jot down things as I had an opportunity to pop in and out, but
Becky, can I make just one last comment?
absolutely.
One other thing that got brought up in our meeting was, everybody doesn't necessarily use the same SIS system. And sometimes the reports require us to do some data mining that sometimes it's easier for some LEAs to do because of the robustness, I guess, of their SIS. And sometimes Aspire may not have necessarily the capability to run the reports that's being even asked. And so sometimes some LEAs are required to go in and run their own, pivot tables or, additional data collecting resources outside of the SIS itself, and that can become labor intensive. So maybe as part of this conversation, really evaluating not only how is the data collected on the back end, but what are the resources that the state has for the collection on the front end and the systems that are there to consolidate and make those things happen. So this is my thought.
Thank you, Nathan. That's great feedback. We appreciate that. So let me see if I can get back to the PowerPoint. Let's see. So anything else you want to share?
One more chat came in. I just wanted to put out there, Lisa said, Qualtrics surveys do not produce a retrievable report for those who submit them. And so they're copying as they go, but the resultant formatting just leaves a lot to be desired. Tough management because they aren't able to print that or, save that.
Okay, that's really good to know. And I haven't had Qualtrics training. There are some people on our staff that have, but that's good information to take back to the Qualtrics team in our data and statistics department.
And then Carrie Ann just shares, if you forget to copy as you go, you lose the Qualtrics info. Just a reminder, try to keep saving that as you're moving along or printing it out or however they're doing that copy.
Okay. So let me see.
Yeah, and I think, Becky, this is Renee from Itinerants. I think to add on to that, hearing you say our Qualtrics team and our data team, charters in small districts, we don't necessarily have a Qualtrics team or data team. That's usually your principal or one of your admin staff. So I think that's part of the challenge is there's people who are learning how to do it and are really good at it, but then the user side, it's we're sort of getting the brunt of that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your comment. I was really actually referring to our USBE data and statistics team and our Qualtrics team. We don't really have a data person on our team. We've been begging for one for a number of years and haven't been able to get a person, haven't been able to get funding to get a person yet. So we have to rely on our data and statistics team as well. We have a few team members on our team that have had some Qualtrics training, but yeah, I totally understand, especially when you're, in a small charter LEA or some of our small rural LEAs, you just don't have, the number of people to go around to do all of this work. It really does become a challenge.
Yeah.
I'm going to pull that PowerPoint back up and see if I can get it to display the way. Let's see. There we go. So please, at any time, if there's additional information that you want to email to us, or if you want us to set up another opportunity where you can just meet in small groups and talk about these kind of things and provide feedback, we are more than happy to set that up at any point in time. Your feedback really is important. So, and we're really excited to have some LEAs involved with us in that consolidated needs assessment work and the resource allocation work. The feedback's been really important. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some things we might consider for professional learning if you are interested. And again, these are just some things that I've been thinking about, but it may not be anything that you are interested in at all, and that's perfectly fine. But we're just thinking about, what we might be able to do to support you and to support schools, to support, and maybe not even doing anything else this year because things are so stressful right now with the COVID situation that we don't want to put any additional burdens on LEAs or schools by any means, but maybe thinking forward once we get, the virus is under control a little better, we have vaccines and treatments that will help in that arena. But William Parrott and Kathleen Budge, who are husband and wife team and professors at Boise State University, recently published the second edition of their book, Turning High Poverty Schools into High Performing Schools. So the original edition of their book was published in 2012, and it looked at their initial research with schools across the country that were high poverty schools, but really getting amazing student outcomes. So they've engaged in additional research, and this book came out in April of this year. So that would be one opportunity. We could purchase the book and do a book study with them, or we could provide copies of the book and have them do some, some training for us, which could include you as Title I directors. We could extend it out if you wanted to include, principals and teachers and others. So that's just one idea. USB has done 2 cohorts of teacher clarity and assessment capable learners. Jennifer Thronson did a cohort that finished up last school year. It was a 2-year process. And then Title I started a cohort last winter and are continuing that this year. Our presenters, Nancy Fry and Tony Faddis, have been providing our training this year virtually. And we shortened those meetings down to 3 hours. So they do a session in the morning and then they repeat the session in the afternoon to try to meet as many people's schedules as possible. And then we're able to send out their slides and other handouts to the school teams that they can use as they have fit, as they have time. So that's another opportunity we could possibly pursue. Another thing that I know that the Corwin team that has the rights to developing assessment capable learners, which is based on Dr. John Hattie's work. Corwin owns the North American rights to those materials, and they work closely with Dr. Hattie. But something that I noticed they were offering this summer was an opportunity for educators to go through a several-day training to become certified as a trainer for teacher clarity, which would then build capacities for districts and LEAs to, send a person that's been through either Jennifer's cohort or a Title I cohort, and they have the basics of, what that is, and then they would be able to be a trainer back in their own LEAs, so that rather than us, providing training and bringing in national presenters, you would have someone at your LEA that could continue that work and work with teachers and coaches and others. So that's another thing that we might consider. And then a couple of others. This past summer, we were going to have the Summer Systems Conference, and that had to be canceled due to the pandemic. But we had arranged for Tara Brown, the Connections coach, and also Dr. Linda Cargus-Bone. Linda's the picture at the top, and Tara's the one, the second picture. I've noticed I receive emails and different things from them. They've been doing virtual sessions with states and districts and schools across the country. Dr. Bone focuses on brain-based learning, especially dealing with students that have had adverse childhood experiences. So looking at those various ACEs that impact students. So I've seen her present at the National Title I Conference. She's excellent. Tara Brown is all about making those personal connections with kids that we know make such a difference. I'm sure we've all had people in our own lives that, you know, made those connections with us and made us feel like we were capable and competent. We could do hard things. We could achieve, you know, achieve things that we wanted to achieve. And so she as well is very energetic, has excellent strategies to reach out to students, to parents, to colleagues, to families. So those are some other things we might consider. So I'm going to stop sharing again so I can see you.
And Becky, one question that came through, I just want to confirm.
Yes.
Susie Ramos asking, is there a way to get involved in some of those groups that have already started, or are you looking at having another cohort coming up?
It would be a new cohort. Yeah, you have to start these things from the beginning with the teacher clarity and assessment capable learners. We're in year 2 of that. So we've already had, I think, let's see, 1, 2, we've had 4 days of the 7 days of training. So our next day coming up will be in March, I think. No, January, we have a date in January, and then there'll be another date in the spring, and that will wrap up that second cohort. So we'd be looking to see if there are LEAs and schools interested in starting another cohort. So I know some of you are currently participating. Some of you participated in that first cohort that Jennifer Thronson organized, and the sense that I've been getting personally as a teacher, I really love what they're presenting. I've studied instruction since I've been a young teacher at the elementary level. I always wanted to make sure that I knew what I was doing and was doing the best that I possibly could for my students. And so as someone who studied instruction, did my dissertation on reading comprehension instruction, what they're doing is just meaningful, and I think it's easy for teachers to grasp. It's certainly nothing new. It's basically about being clear in your intentions, having, you know, a learning objective, a language objective, a social objective. How are kids going to interact around that learning? You know, understanding how learning progresses. So you take a standard and you look at, okay, if the kids have to meet this standard at the end of the year, if that's the goal, how do we scaffold that learning across time to ensure that every student is getting there? So I see Lisa Flinders just posted in the chat box. Lisa is the principal at South Summit Elementary, and she's also the Title I director for South Summit District. She has a lot on her plate. But Lisa and her team have been participating, and the sense I'm getting from participants is that they're really loving it. And we were really worried this year with the pandemic, thinking, you know, we don't want to put burdens on people. We know teachers are at the end of their wits some days, maybe a lot of days. They're stressed. There's so much going on. They're worried about their students. They're worried about their own health. They're worried about their own families. But everybody said, no, let's go ahead. We'll just do it virtually and let's just keep going. And so I've been so pleased with that, and so privileged to be part of that and to interact with schools. We also have a USBE facilitator that was assigned to each of the teams. That it's been a little bit more difficult in the virtual setting, but we have a USB person that's there to help support and, you know, be the liaison between those teams and USBE to see what it is they need. So those are just some ideas that I have. But like I said, they may not be anything that any of you are really interested in. But we just want to collect some feedback. So as we look ahead to do planning, and we're looking at our funding and how we can, you know, utilize our funding and do something that's meaningful for you. Those were just some things that I thought might be possibilities. So any discussion on that, or if you want to put in the chat box, Tracy's so great to monitor out. So yeah, and it looks like Lindsay's saying yes, interested. So maybe what we can do is I hate to even say the word survey, but if we put together just a simple form that you just would click on anything you're interested in, Susie's saying yes. So I don't want it to be anything burdensome. I see Katina's responding yes. It would just take a couple minutes. Amy Mitchell from Washington County has 2 schools from Washington County participating in ACL this year, and they've just been wonderful. And I'm so grateful for those of you that are supporting your schools and attending that and, you know, providing that additional support. So we will send out a very, very brief survey. I'm going to call out Leslie Evans. She knows how to do surveys in forms, which is this, it's not a Qualtrics survey. It's very, very simple. It's like a little quick survey monkey. And we'll just kind of list those options and you can just click yes, I'm interested, and then we'll kind of get data on which ones seem to be of most interest, and then we can start reaching out as our team to these providers about, you know, what we can do to set that up and some timelines that we could get back to you. So thanks so much for your feedback on that. Yeah, Missy's saying Qualtrics is the new swear word. Okay. All right. Thank you, Missy. Yeah, I don't use Qualtrics. I don't know much about it. I filled out surveys, but I don't know how to create them. So I'm not going to add to your burdens with that personally. So let's see. Let me come back here to the, oh yeah, and Leslie's saying I won't use Qualtrics. She promises. Okay, so moving on. Cheryl Ellsworth is working on a really great, whoops, I went too far. She's working on a great initiative, the Belonging Schools Initiative. So Cheryl, you back with us? She had to step away, I know, for a minute.
Yes, I had to step away to speak to some leaders at Salt Lake Community College. I am here. I don't know, am I the only one who sees it very small? Is there a way to make it larger?
Oh, I'm seeing it on my laptop in the small version, but on my monitor, I'm seeing a full version. I don't know what you're seeing.
We see your small version where you see the next slide coming up.
Oh,
yeah.
That's okay. Let me stop sharing and
Can
see
you do display settings? Okay, because I'm using it to drive my.
Let me see if I can. Okay, let me try this. Is that better, Cheryl?
Oh yes, that is perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay. Sorry about that.
So I have no idea if I'm backlit or anything, but hopefully I'm not. So as you can see, well, let me actually start with the fact that some of you may not know this, but I was part of a fellowship from the years 2018 to 2019 for 20 months with JD Talbot from Granite District, Jenny Mayor Glenn, who was with Salt Lake District, now at the University of Neighborhood Partners, and Dr. Paul Kuttner at the University of Neighborhood Partners. We wanted to do family engagement and look at it from a preschool to 16 approach. So from early childhood to college age. And if you could go to the next slide for me, Becky. When we did this fellowship, we had to do a really deep dive learning into family engagement here in Utah. And we learned from doing empathy interviews with administrators, legislators, teachers, parents, students, all kinds of people, that we got some research that families and were feeling like there were 3 processes that schools can implement to help build a culture of belonging that extends to all families. This was around welcoming and valuing, reciprocal learning, and impact. And we call this the Belonging Schools Initiative, which is a plan for advancing equity through family engagement with Utah schools. And right now our slogan is Utah schools belong to you, you belong in Utah schools. I just wanted to bring some of you up to speed. Some of you have seen this research, but some of you are new. But finally, after working on this for a very long time, and then a huge hiccup with everything COVID related, we were supposed to start doing this in April, but we're going to be rolling this out starting in January. If we can go to the next slide. So I just wanted to give you a heads up of what our partnership overview is. To build belonging schools across Utah, we will launch 2 programs in 2021. We are seeking a broad coalition of educators and leaders representative of Utah's diverse landscape and communities. So I am talking, I want from San Juan to Box Elder, I want everyone. I want reservations, urban, suburban, rural, remote. I want all of you a part of our leadership roundtable. So the first part of our partnership is that we will have a family engagement leader roundtable. Leaders of family engagement statewide will meet on a bi-monthly basis to discuss and catalog family engagement best practices for Utah schools, which means it's for your community versus saying, Cheryl, what can I do? You're going to figure it out for your community. And recruitment kicks off January 2021. The first roundtable meeting will be held in February, March 2021. But the next part of this is the Family Engagement Collaborative, where teachers from across the state are invited to join this 6-session professional development series. Teachers will learn concrete research-based strategies for family engagement and will have the opportunity to share that learning with colleagues around the state. At least 2 teachers per participating school must apply. Recruitment kicks off for that April 2021, and the first session will be held in June 2021. So to give you a longer timeline, we have an 18-month contract, a 1.5-year contract with Flamboyant. And so this first beginning part, first 6 months of the year, we're going to be working with the leaders and the teachers so that we can then in the next school year really be rolling out the Belonging Schools initiatives in schools. So I'm really excited about this. This has been something that I've been working on for a very long time, and I didn't want it to just die on this like hill of like COVID. I knew we had to be patient. And so the next slide just has my information if you want to go ahead and share that, Becky. But essentially, again, recruitment for all of that will begin in January. So first it's for you leaders, like for you to really understand. When I was meeting with the Salt Lake Community College folks this morning, a question came up. I see that teachers are for the second part. Should we be planning on stipends for them? The answer to that is absolutely yes. These teachers are going to be meeting 6 times in the year after school. And so we want to make sure that we're compensating them. Our contract work, what we've paid for at the state is to get the training materials, all of the needed pieces for your communities. That's all that I have. Are there any questions? We can stop sharing now, Becky. That's all I have.
Thank you, Cheryl. It's always great to hear from you. And yeah, Cheryl has worked on this for quite a while, and it kind of got hung up due to COVID, and you just kept dogging it and following it through to get all the paperwork in place. So this will be a great initiative for LEAs to participate in, and again, build some capacity.
Yep. Thank you. And yes, all the other things that we're doing, home visits related, I will be reaching out to LEA directors for stories and numbers and all of those pieces. We're going to be highlighted in the national parent-teacher home visit project for home visits because Utah had some really high numbers last year. So keep up the good work with the things that we're already doing, but this will be a deeper dive into family engagement. So be thinking, if you're a leader that wants to be involved for our leadership roundtable, great. But even if it's not you and there's someone else at your district that you're like, this person needs to be a part of this, please let them know. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Cheryl. And you should notice a couple of months ago, Cheryl started putting together a 1-page family engagement moment, she calls it. And we've been sending those out to you on a monthly basis where she highlights something that's happening and provides, some information and ideas that are just quick and simple. We hope that you're sharing those out with your Title I schools. So next, we're going to turn the time over to Tracy Van Deventer, who is the director for the USBE Center for Continuous School Improvement. And she, along with Dr. Max Lang and Leslie Evans, who are our two school improvement specialists, they will be talking to you about school improvement.
Thank you so much, everyone. We wanted to get together and answer a couple of questions, especially regarding some of the funding and CSI, TSI related questions. And Becky, I'm just checking in. Was this kind of an optional because it was more specific, or did you want to just have everyone be part of this conversation?
Sorry. Oh, thanks for reminding me, Tracy. Somebody has to keep me on the straight and narrow.
It's
Yeah,
all good.
if you do not have schools in improvement and you're not wanting to spend these last few minutes of the meeting with us, that's perfectly fine. As I said, the meeting will be recorded, but if you do have schools that are in, school improvement, you may want to stay and listen to the updates that Tracy and Max and Leslie have for you today. So if you're going to sign off, thank you for being here today. We're grateful for everything that you do, and we'll certainly be in touch with more information.
Thank you, everyone. Very good. And that gives people a chance to step away, and those who are here will be focusing on funding discussions related to some of our federal funds. I'll go ahead and pass it off.
Thanks, Tracy. I'll start here. So we've talked a lot about the impacts of COVID today, right? And that's an ongoing reality we're all dealing with. So I wanted to lay out a reminder and then get your feedback and opinion about where we should go from here. So the first cohort of CSI schools, both the low graduation rate and the 5% overall performance schools, were identified in 18-19. So we're calling that planning year 0. In that year, every LEA with schools identified was issued a formula award and then subsequently a competitive award. And these decisions were influenced by and collaboratively decided upon in a group called the Committee of Practitioners that is run through Dr. Donaldson's team. So that was the advice we were given, is let's give a formula award, then a competitive, and competitive ongoing, so that schools in need of more funding above the formula amount could tailor make their proposal to win a competitive award for funding to implement their SIP. Okay, so 18-19 status quo, we give formula award, competitive award. 19-20, proceed with just the competitive award. And that was our plan going forward. So now, with COVID onset, we decided in spring of 20 to administer a formula grant to ease that administrative burden of having to submit a proposal and ask schools to tailor their wishes in other ways. So we used the same formula we used in 18-19 and issued those grants. So our question is, would it be useful and beneficial, and could schools spend their money by 9/30/2021 if we issued another competitive grant in this second implementation year? So some of you, hopefully those who have stayed, have schools in improvement in CSI, and you could always get back to us with this, but if you have input in the chat, we'd be happy to hear.
Just to jump in, we certainly are wanting to know from you what is the best way for you to be able to access this money, but we just finished a conversation earlier today that talked about we are up to our eyeballs in reports and surveys, and Qualtrics has become a swear word today. So we know that competitive comes with its own challenges and extra duties on your end. So we aren't necessarily swaying it one way or the other. We wanted to just know that this is an option. And if you feel that this would be beneficial for you, we'll certainly open it up. But if you're feeling like, nope, we're pretty good, we'll we're satisfied with the formula distribution, we could go that direction as well. And I see James talking about that possibly competitive could be good depending on the time frame of the competitive process. So good feedback. And Jam, feel free to put in your favorite time frame up there for recommendation, and we can take that into consideration.
Leslie, let me ask a brief question and a backstory. So we have 8 CSI schools in Granite. In early December, I'm pulling those folks together. We're going to do start a monthly CSI cohort meeting for supports and planning towards exit. If I brought this up and kind of a council with those 8 principals, would that feedback generated be too late for you, or when are you hoping to receive all the feedback?
I think it's reasonable to wait. Did you say beginning of December?
Yeah. So, let me look at the date one more time.
We don't have a hard and fast. We want this to be useful to you, but also doable to get it out there.
Okay.
But I don't see a problem. I'd like to get the input.
It's the Wednesday, December 2nd. We're meeting that morning.
That's great.
Okay.
I think if we had this input by December 15th out of a hat, that could be a Sunday or something, I don't know, but mid-December, then I feel comfortable we would be able to get that out and offered in January. The competitive, I mean, we've issued this grant before. It's essentially the asks need to align with the SIP and be allowable expenses and within the budget of the whole grant. So
okay. I'll meet with them.
No long Qualtrics application, promise.
And Jam's kind of put an update to her comment too, that if the funding's to be useful to schools, they would need to know in mid-January what their progress to date's been. And this is the time that they may need additional funds to make significant impact. So they need to have access to their funds in early February. So tapping into trying to get that turnaround as quickly as possible so they can, access those funds, know where they're at and know what's left and be able to make some decisions.
Understood. So in case I'm sure we're not capturing all, and especially the alternative high schools that are identified for CSI. So in this meeting, so we will, I will write an email with the expectation that feedback is given by December, but I'm kind of hearing that you might think you need it, but mid-December, and then we'll work our hardest to get it out and in Utah grants by January, mid-January.
And if you don't mind, I just want to check with Jam. Are you asking that we would try to get to the schools what their progress to date has been on spending the existing funds? Or am I misreading that?
What it is that the schools, we're monitoring, we're working with them, we're analyzing their progress, and that halfway mark is a significant mark for them. We're talking about their progress. We're seeing how they've used the funds. What's the impact been to date? So in that January timeframe, if they need to make some necessary refinements to adjust and get the results that they want by the end of the year, they may need additional funds at that time to either do the PD or whatever they need to have done to make that shift. That's what I'm talking about, because they're monitoring themselves weekly, monthly, but that is that midway to see where are we at, that sometimes significant refinements are made.
I see. Thanks for clarifying. So looking at maybe that 90-day plan will be coming to a close, and they'll be looking at creating a new plan, and that would help them make decisions about whether those funds would be useful or not.
Yeah, we don't use the term 90-day plans anymore in our district. It's the action steps, and it's midway during the year to see do they have to abandon or discontinue some action steps, refine others, and maybe add new ones.
Perfect. Thanks for clarifying.
Just a little more context, some of the reason we're asking this question is that it can also be burdensome to be able to spend all that money. So there's been some hanging out there money from 18 that we've been having a hard time spending through the system, but.
Leslie, I'm so glad you said that, because that's why I say possibly. I don't want to just throw money at them. I want us to look mid-year to see, okay, what's been spent to date? Where is your balances? Do you really truly need more money? Because if they need it, then I want to have that opportunity to apply quickly for it and get it. If they don't, let's just utilize their resources more effectively because they have some that still hasn't been used.
I'll jump in. I agree, JM. That was my reason for pause. I really want to talk to the principals, and some principals might say, yes, give me more money, but part of our workshop is a really critical lens of how have you spent your money, and kind of push back or push the other way and saying that they could really utilize it. So that I agree. We don't want the money to be burdensome or wasted, but if my forthcoming feedback is if it will be helpful in achieving these goals, then I'll communicate that to you, Leslie.
Thank you. Great. Got an enthusiastic yes from Chelsea as well. Well, we have a couple other topics to throw out there, but we did want this to be somewhat an informal discussion. And if you have questions, please feel free to jump in. But I think we can move on to the next slide if everyone's okay with that. Tracy, do you want me to take this one as well? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you, Leslie.
Welcome. So again, starting with, with the lens of COVID and things, CSI and TSI Exit, we've gotten some clarification on, sorry, this is just a reminder of what's currently in the federal legislation for CSI Exit. That if you're a school that was identified for having the lowest 5%, you have to rank above the bottom 15% of Title I schools in 21-22. And just to clarify, that's a 1-point marker. So in 21-22, you have to be above the 15%. Whereas low grad rate schools have to have a graduation rate above 67% in both this year, 2021 and 21-22. And then schools in TSI will exit when for 2 consecutive years, they have no student groups performing below the percentage of points associated with the lowest performing 5% of schools. So just a reminder on that one, on this slide in particular. Any questions here? And the impact of not having assessment data in 19-20 does not affect the exit for CSI overall performance or grad rate, just to clarify there.
Leslie, and I usually beat this drum, but I know was where TSI, the exit criteria, we kind of hang our hat on the 2 consecutive years and we don't have that year. So I just still assuming that the state board will kind of grapple with what the exit looks like considering the summative waiver in 2020.
Yes. Those discussions are still pending. As you can imagine, there's lots of larger issues keeping people busy.
Yeah, very good.
We'll keep bugging though, because we really want to answer you one day and have a party.
Lisa's asking a question about if there will be an update about TSI, but I'm not sure, Lisa, which update you were thinking of. Or whether there's like a new identification or.
Just to clarify, we did not identify TSI schools for this year. So there wouldn't have been an update for that. So the spreadsheets that are on the resources tab of the assessment and accountability website are the most up to date. In other words, there's the 18-19 list or the 17-18 and 18-19, the two years. They're listed funny, but it's just the 2 years that we've identified CSI, which was 18-19, 19-20.
Perfect. Okay. Lisa says that we've answered it. It's good.
Okay, good. Here's where I started to talk about changes due to assessment irregularities. So we're using that term quite a bit these days, right? An assessment irregularity was having a soft closure on all schools in Utah and not administering end of year testing. If that were to come to pass again at the end of this year, the state board has approved some of our recommendations to have a plan in place in case that happens. So if that does happen, a state review panel will review eligible schools' data and make recommendations to the Utah State Board, who then approves or doesn't our recommendations. And I've provided one example here for you, and some of you are very familiar with this example, that the schools that would have exited state turnaround or would have been eligible for exit for state turnaround based on 1920 results, we had to come up with a process for them to do that. And so they were eligible to present to this panel of 10 people if they were above the lowest 3%. And then they addressed the following questions. Do you have evidence that you have made substantial progress and growth in addition to the data in the accountability system or without that data? And do you have more data from the implementation of your school improvement plan or turnaround plan? So we wanted to give you a heads up that if you are a school in improvement or you have a school that's in CSI, that's collecting progress data and formative assessment data and any information that would be helpful to show that you've made substantial progress would be very wise to keep. Now, I know many of you, all of you are keeping it as it is, but like in a formal way that's easy to access in case you need to. We need to enact this special provision. Open to other additions or questions.
And we did share that out with the cohort schools and let them know that this had been done in the past, but it's recent that the state board approved that recommendation that we use that model again if there are additional irregularities, so that there would be an exit panel that would review presentations, and you would only be able to make those presentations if you're above the 3%, and then highlighting those final two bullets, two questions that are listed on the screen there. So we just didn't want anyone to be surprised that those would be the kinds of questions most likely the exit panel would ask schools to present on. And Max has answered one question regarding CSI and TSI, that yes, if your school was designated that way, they have maintained that designation. Katrina Walker asking, have lower graduation rates due to pandemic been considered? And Katrina, no, unfortunately, the federal government's been pretty consistent about that 67% rate. And I think the only piece that is being considered is the participation rates in the assessment, but not in the graduation rates itself. Jam's wanting to know, Leslie, if you'd be willing to share your PowerPoint with them. And I think that Becky already has that included in the slides that was sent. So this is just like the tail end of those slides there. So. And Darren Nielsen, of course, Assistant Superintendent, shared this morning the struggles with looking at how does accountability and how do we, move forward. And generally this year, as we have data, we are not expecting to have accountability tied into that, which is why some of those dates are being pushed forward. And as that becomes more clear and addendums and amendments and waivers have been approved by the federal government, we'll be sharing that out with you. Other questions? Doesn't look like it. Nothing's popping up in chat.
Not so much, but I just want, and I think I'm sure but I wanted to verify. So I'm looking at slide 43 and kind of circling back to the possibility that if there's testing, continued testing irregularities and a CSI school is above a whatever cut percent, then it's not for sure, but there's a possibility that they can provide an alternate portfolio that might mirror. So I'm using all these ifs and mights and maybes that might mirror how Kennedy Junior High, for example, gave a portfolio presentation to USBE for exit. So if I use all those ims and ums and maybes, would I feel, so it sounds like we're good to present that just so schools, our CSI schools start preparing. Did I understand that correctly?
The hardest thing about the CSI as a piece of that panel presentation is it's a 1 year only, above that 15%. Whereas with the cohort schools or the TSI schools, they've got a couple of years where they're asked to show above. So that one I'm probably less comfortable in saying, yeah, I think that's an option that's going to be out there. We're all just crossing our fingers and toes that by next spring, not this coming spring in a few months, but a year and a couple of months, that we'll have a solid piece of evidence that we could have in our end of level assessments that would allow us to see that they are above the 15%. Because in order to be able to present to the panel previously, you had to at least to have some evidence that you were above that baseline score. So I guess it could be possible that if a CSI school has been above that 15% in previous years, while they've been a CSI, they might be able to use that as evidence to say, and we've maintained it. But that hasn't been addressed at this point in specifics to the CSI.
Okay. Well, I like I'll cross fingers and toes that would be a consideration. Would be cool.
Other questions, comments?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't look like it, Leslie.
Okay, that was okay, there we go.
So
Good.
thank you. Oh, go ahead, Tracy.
Well, I was just going to say, and of course, we're always open to feedback from you. If at any time you have questions after we've completed our meeting today, our goal is to serve you and to support you and to make sure that you have everything you need to make sure your schools, your Title I schools, are supported.
Yes, absolutely. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We're giving you back a few minutes of your day, which is always great, right? About 21 minutes you're getting back. So we had an ambitious agenda and we managed to get through all of that. So thank you so much for your attendance, for your participation, your feedback. As I said, we love working with you. I think we have the best educators in Utah. Really, bar none, you're by far the best people. We love you. We want you to be well and safe, and please stay in touch. Please let us know anything we can do to help you, because that's why we're here. And there are no silly questions. All questions are important to us. So please send those our way, and have a wonderful rest of your day and a happy Thanksgiving. Bye,
Thank you, everyone.
You want to wave to everybody? You can turn your camera on. I love seeing everybody in the Brady Bunch squares. Wish we could see you in person. It's just not the same, just seeing your little names in a box.
Is there any way you could put the screen back up there with the contact information for just one more moment?
You betcha. Let me just get to that. Yeah, it's in your, you have it too in the slide. So are you seeing that again?
It's there.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for
Jason.
being